And from the Workers Credit Union studios here at Fitchburg Access Television, hello again, I'm Scott May, and this is North Central Journal. And we have a special show for you this time around. We've invited several of our former friends and colleagues from the days of radio here in Fitchburg and Leominster and Gardner to join us and talk about their careers, their experiences, the fun they've had in this business. And most of us have worked together at one time or another. Most of us had worked at the radio stations, all of them here in this market. Gail Dussault is here. She started her career at WLMS in Leominster and worked her way over to WFGL, where she joined our friend Dave Svens, who we have here via Zoom from the great state of Maine. You notice Dave has still got that face for radio. We have Travis Condon, who is the youngest member of the group, most recently having worked at the former WEIM, and now is over at the Chamber of Commerce.
Yes, thank you.
Travis, good to have you here. Greg Vine at the other end of the table here, next to Travis, has spent his career, most of his career in broadcasting, a lot of it though in journalism in general. He does some writing now for Athol?
Athol Daily News.
Athol Daily News, and on the school committee up in Winchendon, right?
Right.
You haven't been defeated yet? You're still
No,
there?
we've got election coming up in May, but I don't have an
We'll
opponent. So.
Ben Parker, many of you still listen to Ben. He's on WBZ in Boston, but started his career as well in Fitchburg, worked at GAW in Gardner, and he and I worked together at the former WEIM.
So I'm a former colleague, or am I a former friend? Because that's how you introduced it. I couldn't.
Well, former is relative. Formally,
Colleague,
I think.
not friend.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
that's
think
fine.
we're all still friends.
All right. Fine.
And next to me is Ann Bisbee, who is, well, she grew up in the business, literally. Her dad was Frank Philippone, who owned WEIM, and where most of us could leave work and go home for the day and kind of relax, Ann could leave work and go home and still be in radio. Ann is also the producer of North Central Journal, so we decided with those two attributes we wanted to have her here, as well as the operation coordinator here at FATV.
I was forced.
You were forced.
Who's producing if you're sitting here?
I should be
Yeah,
in
how
there.
does that work?
all right,
I'd
never
rather
mind.
be in there.
Actually, she was part of the decision to do this, so you can blame her.
Good decision.
I want to start with Travis. Your career has been the most recent locally.
I think we're going to say the shortest.
I was going to say that, but I decided to change it. WPKZ, formerly WEIM. And because you're the youngest member of the group here, I wondered if you grew up listening to any of these people in this room.
100%. WEIM was the source for school closings and cancellations and delays.
That's right.
I had family that was all from Fitchburg, so like Ray C was a legend in our household, and all the different voices. Ben actually, I was in a band very briefly in high school, and Ben Parker was the MC for 2 of our 3 gigs. So we actually go back pretty
Sorry
far.
that didn't work out. I don't know if it's my fault. Sorry there wasn't a 4th gig for you.
That's back when you had the hair, the mohawk. Right?
Yes, yeah. But yeah, so I grew up very familiar with WEIM and then WPKZ. So to be able to go to work there as like my first job out of college, it was really a little bit of a dream and kind of neat to be able to broadcast in your own backyard.
Now, what inspired you to pursue a career in broadcasting?
No one told me not to.
Don't do it.
No one warned me.
Where were we?
Yeah, exactly. So growing up, I guess it was EIM, and then Lauren and Wally on WROR,
Yep.
and then Frank and Jen on WXLO were huge. I actually met Frank and Jen at like the recycling yard in Lancaster. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old. I was too shy to say anything other than hi. But I knew I just wanted to be in radio. There was something about the fact that you listen to these people every day and they became your friends, and that really fascinated me. So that was what spurred me to go into the journey, and I never thought to ask about the pitfalls of radio before I got into it.
Well, I wanted to go to Ms. Bisbee, Ann, next to me, because your journey in this business is different from the rest of us around the table. As I said before, you grew up in radio. Your dad, I think, was the general manager, was he, at EIM before he became the owner? Mm-hmm. So he was there for how many years?
Forever.
Forever.
For
forever.
my whole life. So yes, so we came to Fitchburg, well, we lived in Leominster, but he came down to WEIM probably in '66 maybe. I was, it was when we were just babies. And he was salesperson, sales manager. He was on air, and eventually became general manager, and then eventually bought the station.
And what was it like, not at the radio station, but at home? Was he ever not working in radio?
No.
Did he ever wind down?
You
I know
all
you
knew my
did.
I think everybody knew my dad, right?
never did.
He never stopped. But it was, I mean, I wouldn't have gone into it if it wasn't for my dad.
Yeah.
Just as a little kid, everywhere, he would take us into the station. It was always the station, and I just loved meeting everybody and seeing everybody. And everywhere we went, in Fitchburg or Leominster, hey Frank. I thought my dad knew everybody on the planet. And it was fun, it was nice. I started interning when I was in high school and worked with Lisa Mullins and did election coverage. And we were talking a little bit before air about what that was like back in the day, and it's much different. And I was just, here, go interview these people. I had no idea who they were, and I had to ask first if they had won. So that was my first in-depth question. Did you win?
Did you win?
Okay. And I just loved it. And it was a family business. When my dad bought it, my mom came in and was the accountant. My future husband was a salesperson and then became an engineer and found his entire career through WEIM. So it was fun. It was really fun. Was it difficult? Was it hard? Was there stresses? Absolutely. Working with family is not always easy, but my dad was a pretty special guy, and I really treasure those moments.
Now, Gail, you started at WLMS in Leominster.
I did.
And I'm wondering, between you and Dave Svens and I, we were all in radio. Dave started in the late 60s, and we'll get to you in a minute, David. But you and I kind of started in the 70s, so we go back, the three of us go back a ways. What was it like in broadcasting being a woman? Because there weren't very many women that I remember in radio,
No.
at least locally.
It was great. And there were no women in any of the communities that I covered. So there were no women firefighters or police officers, or I don't remember any politicians that were, any lawmakers. So it was great, and I loved that career. 10 years I spent in radio, and still miss it, still remember all the stories.
Now, what inspired you to pursue that career?
Well, actually, when I graduated from college 100 years ago, when I graduated, I had a degree in education, but I didn't want to be a teacher. So I left and I went on the road to be sing in a band. And that fell apart, that fell apart. And so when I came home, my father, I didn't know what I was going to do. My father heard an ad on WLMS for a Girl Friday at WLMS, and he says, why don't you do that? And I'm like, okay. And I went over there, and the next thing I know, I was doing the news, and Jim Fitzgerald just really gave me, I don't know if everybody remembers him, but gave me a lot of opportunity, and when they needed, like you said, when they needed a female voice, I was it, whether it was a commercial or anything. So it was a great life. I just loved it.
Ben, you like Ann here, is.
I like Ann. Yes, I do like Ann. She's very nice. Yes.
He has to say that because he's right next to
You're
me.
both products of Leominster.
Yes.
Are.
But what kick-started your career? How did you jump into radio?
Wow. Well, it's pretty weird step to radio. I wasn't really thinking of going into radio. I mean, I listened to the radio growing up, and I had my heroes on the radio. My last 3 years in high school, Leominster High School, I did some stringing, and eventually got a byline in the Sentinel, writing sports when Leominster would play basketball specifically. I would write it up, and it was kind of neat. Steve Semple and Chris Daly were at the Sentinel at the time, and if I ever see them, I have to give them a hug because they kind of kick-started my career. I wanted to be a sports writer. That was where my heart was. And then I was getting ready to start college in 1985, the fall of '85, and Rick Brackett at WFGL, who happened to be dating the person who was the assistant manager at the movie theater I worked at. I know it's a long way to get there.
Free tickets?
Yeah, well, free tickets. Yeah, well, of course. But so I met Rick, and Rick pretty much said, "You ever thought about being in radio?" And I pretty much said, "Not really." But they had a board opposition at WFGL. Turn up the knobs and they'd do the weather. So, long story short, I took that job, and 37 years later, here I am. And Dave Svens, by the way, who looks great on TV, by the way, was the news guy at WFGL, the premier news guy when I started there. So Dave and Dave actually was there at the very beginning.
David, speaking of Dave Svens,
Yes.
we would like to welcome you from wherever you are in Maine. Good to see you, as always.
Good to be seen.
Your career started actually at Channel 2 in Boston, and you went from there into broadcasting. Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to Northeast Broadcasting School, which is now defunct. And from the sixth grade on, I knew that I loved radio and I loved sports. So I wanted to be a sportscaster. And the people at Fitchburg High School thought I should go to BU. And I was sick of school, so this was a one-year thing. Well, what happened was we had a TV course, and the TV instructor happened to be a director at WGBH, Channel 2 in Boston. And he said, you ought to come over for one day a week as an intern. I said, no, I'm not interested in TV. And he persisted, and I finally went, and the first show I worked on, they opened the doors, and there was Julia Child. So, but I was there as an intern, and then they hired me full-time, and then they had a cutback. So I came to Fitchburg and ended up at Broadcast House, 170 Pritchard Street, the George Chatfield empire, and ended up initially working for Muzak as an installer and repairer of Muzak systems. And then just waited for an opening, and that's how it started for me.
So you moved from Muzak over to WFGL. I remember because I was a senior in high school in 1969 and had been accepted at a broadcasting school in Boston. And I grew up in Ashburnham, and Dave's parents lived in Ashburnham, and our mothers had become very good friends through the Ashburnham Community Church. One thing led to another, and the mothers arranged for Scott to go visit Dave at WFGL to see what radio was like. And I remember you were thrilled by that visit. I brought my girlfriend with me, and
I think it was a Saturday night too.
it was at night. I remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a date night. It's, so that's why I was there.
Where else would you go?
We had really, I mean, going to radio.
Yeah.
So that's the first time I met Dave, and then of course we worked together. I don't know, is it coming up on 75 years or something like that?
Something like that. I got, before I forget, I got a comment. I thought it was interesting that Travis's inspiration to get into radio occurred in a dump, and
Well, that brings us to the other end of the table here, and Greg Vine, and I saved you for last, Greg, because we share so much personal history. You and my brother are best friends. My brother also went into radio.
Right.
We're Oakmont graduates, and there was a fourth Oakmont graduate, Scott Bingham, and at one time,
Right.
the four of us were Oakmont graduates in professional radio. My brother worked for many years at WSRS
Right.
after, I think, starting out at WFMP.
Yes.
We also went to Graham Junior College, the school I was talking about in Boston, and
Yeah, Todd and I were
Yeah.
roommates there.
and I preceded you, and after that, I think it fell apart after you guys. But you began your broadcasting career at WGAW.
Right, and I blame my mother.
I do too, actually. Not your mother, my mother.
And Dave Svens' mother, too. Well, for
through high
blaming mothers, go ahead. Yeah.
All through high school, I had sort of aspired to become a history teacher. And my mother, who was teaching at Oakmont, talked me out of going into teaching. She said there's no money and there are no jobs in the field, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And at night, while everybody else was listening to Top 40 radio, I was in bed with my transistor radio, actually listening to WTOP out of Washington, D.C., which was an all-news station. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that sounds like sort of a neat thing to do. So I went to school at Graham for broadcast journalism, and eventually ended up working at 1975 at WGAW in Gardner, and did news there for a couple of years. And after that, moved on to FGL and FMP in Fitchburg. So it just sort of went from there.
You know, we mentioned the call letters of these radio stations, and for those of you who may not be familiar with it, WEIM first signed on the air in 1941, October of 41, and GAW followed in 1946. WFGL was WFGM when they signed on in 1950, became WFGL in 1967, and WBNE FM, which became WFMP and now is WXLO, believe it or not, signed on in 1962, I believe. 1960, I'm sorry. WFGM became WFGL in 1962, and WLMS signed on in 1967 and then became WCMX.
There will be a test.
There will be a test. As long as you know the alphabet, you'll be fine. Everything begins with a W. That's it. What I want to do now is we've kind of established our guests here and how our careers kind of started anyway. I'd like to know, and I'll start with Travis because we haven't talked to you for a few minutes. Who inspired you, would you say, not only to get into radio, but during the course of your radio career?
Yeah.
Where did you draw your inspiration from? Is there a particular person, an event, a family member? Who was it?
Sure. My Uncle Frank was like really into music, so I think that's why like really what drew me to want to do music radio. When I was a kid, I ended up in talk radio, but I still am in music down in Virginia. I can talk about that later. But he was a big inspiration in terms of like getting into music. I think radio, again, it was Lauren and Wally on WROR. I used to listen all the time with my dad in the morning. WXLO, Frank and Jen. I actually got to meet Frank and Jen years ago. And I told them, I was like, you're the reason I got into radio. And they're like, we would have warned you. Thanks. But they were actually, it was just hearing them, and it was just hearing how they would talk about these local issues. And I remember the station, I remember the big fire in Worcester, where the firefighters were killed, and just hearing that local broadcasting and that sort of thing, like just their humanity throughout a tragedy like that, and the fact that they were able to kind of bring comfort to so many people. I remember that was like a big moment hearing that for radio as a kid.
Yeah, a lot of us in our careers, and I think when you started in radio, you're a jack of all trades. You took whatever was available. So I started out as a DJ.
Yeah.
Sports was my reason for getting into it, but I started out as a DJ. And then after a couple of years, I got into news, and I really enjoyed the journalistic part of it, and that's how I spent the balance of my career. And I think most of us here, we're in news. We're in the writing, reporting, interviewing part of it. And what drew you to that, Greg?
At first, it was just a fascination with news to sort of be part of what's going on, even though you're not at the center of a story. You're sort of on the periphery as an observer and letting folks know what's happened and why. But one of the things I think that kept me interested is the fact that, especially in a market like this, you really, after a while, when people hear you for a number of weeks or months, you really start to become an important member of the community. And people respect what you're doing, and I think there's a certain amount of expectation that you need to live up to certain things. You know, once you're out of the radio station, you can't just sort of run around and do what you want because people know who you are. And but it's nice. Again, it's nice being a part of the community and having that respect and keeping people informed. It may sound corny, but that's, you know, that's sort of the way I've always felt.
How about you, Gail?
Well, I feel exactly the same way as Greg does, but I learned the very first week that I was there how much power we really had as news people. You know, people believed you. And I realized how much power I had. Really to make or break something. And I enjoyed working with the community and meeting all the people and learning so much. You know, you just knew everything that was going on in the Tri-Cities then. So, and you knew it first, that's what I liked, just getting the scoop. And I would do everything to get the scoop. Yeah. So, and everything, you'd walk into work in the morning and think, oh my God, what's going on today? You know, not much. And then 5 seconds later, it could be the biggest day ever, you know. So a lot of what Greg said resonates with me.
Now, Ben, you're still in the news business.
I am.
But you've worn a number of different hats. What prompted you to, as we're talking here, pursue that journalistic aspect of it?
My metamorphosis to news is pretty complex. When I started at WFGL, I turned knobs and did the weather. You talk about inspiration types of people, and Rick Brackett, who hired me, who said, "You sound better than a lot of people coming out of broadcast school." And I said, maybe this could be a career. So he kind of gave me that fire that, you know, it's nice to hear that you're good at something.
Did he say you sound better than I do? Or
He said, "You sound better than Dave Svens," but that was all he said. I didn't know what he meant, but no. But I fiddled around in music radio for a while. I was a DJ for close to 20 years, weddings and things. Worked on a cruise ship in Hawaii in the early 90s, so I kind of switched gears there, being a DJ and an entertainer for whatever that's worth. But when I came back and I got back into radio, I did morning shows at a few places. I think the first touch on news, though, was before I went to Hawaii in early 91, when the Gulf War had just broken out. And I was doing mornings at WGAW. I did about 9 months of mornings. And near the end of my tenure there, after the war broke out, we had the lieutenant governor on, and we had people from, I worked to get some people from Washington to come on and talk. And we talked about the local soldiers who had gone over there and had people call in and give their thanks and whatever. And I thought, and it was good. It was big. I mean, it felt like I did something that actually mattered. Spinning records is nice, and doing morning shows and things like that, you know, and saying, here's the latest from whoever, you know, the Beach Boys, is fine. But when you feel like something really matters, and you did something that matters, and I think that was even though I stayed with music for a while longer, that was probably the, hey, this newsy kind of thing, this presenting people with stuff that's more than songs and dances, you know, means something. And so when I came back, I went to Boston, fiddled around, doing some traffic on different radio stations. And Travis mentioned the Worcester fire, the warehouse fire. When I worked at WRKO at the time in Boston, and we covered it intensely. Paul Tuthill, who was big in news for a while, he's doing stuff out in Western Mass, I believe, still now. I haven't seen him in a while, but you know, he worked hard to cover that story when it first broke. I went out there on the weekend and we covered that, and it was very emotional too. But we won an award for breaking news for that fire. And I've always told people, and I so much respect what firefighters do and the loss of life that night. I always say I'd give up every award I ever got to save 6 firefighters' lives. But we did what was presented to us in a very good way. I had no control in the fire. I had no control over the deaths of firefighters or anybody else. We did it well. We presented it to people, and that was a very proud moment in my life in news, because we did what news people are supposed to do, and we gave you the facts, even though the facts were sad.
Yeah. I had a similar experience when I was working at WRKO. This was, I think, in 1981, the Great Lynn Fire, and it was a huge, massive fire in downtown Lynn, and we too won an award for the news coverage. It was a Saturday morning, and I was arrived at WRKO about 4 a.m. And the security guard said, "There's a big fire in Lynn." I made a few phone calls and realized this thing was absolutely huge. And I called a couple of other reporters that worked for RKO, because on Saturdays I was the only news person there. And they went down to Lynn, and between the two of them and myself back at the station, we kept reporting the events of the morning as that fire unfolded, and was eventually, it may still be going today. It was a massive,
Yeah, it was a big fire.
It was a big fire. But
You mentioned that you worked alone on Saturday mornings, then you called in these other couple of people.
Yeah.
And certainly we think of coverage of big events, and you see television stations and they've got 4 cameramen and 5 reporters and producers. A lot of times in radio, it's 1 or 2 or 3 people doing all that legwork, and it's a lot of work. But there's a reward at the end that, hey, we did this with a short staff, like you did with Lynn, and even like we did at RKO with the fire in Worcester.
And I think that, from my perspective, moving from playing music, which I got to be pretty bored with, to doing news, was that there was always something going on. It was fresh, it was happening, it was breaking. There was always something new to report. Not every single day, certainly, but it was more challenging and certainly a lot more self-satisfying doing that. As you said, Greg, people in the community got to know you because you got out to talk to the police every morning. I stopped at Fitchburg Police Station every morning on my way to work to find out what happened the night before because we didn't have overnight staff. So you started from scratch every morning to build the news for the morning. And one of the things we did, and David remembers this, going into the Fitchburg Police Department, and they would buzz you in. Well, one morning I went in and the door was open. I went in and the officer in charge was asleep. So I just went through the reports on my own and left. I didn't wake up the poor guy. But Dave, you remember doing that too, starting out going through not only the newspapers in the morning, but making police calls. Right. You call all the
Absolutely.
local.
Yeah, 20 Elm Street. I'd stop by every morning, and similar to what the story you just told, I went in one morning, and they used to buzz you in, but sometimes the buzzer didn't work. And I went in one morning, and I looked through the window, and there's like 3 people in the office. They're all sleeping. So, it was unlocked. So I got in. Got over to the logbook, wrote down what had happened overnight, slipped out. They never knew I was there.
Was that the morning you broke me out of jail, or what was that?
That was it. That was it. But yeah, so but those are the things that were, you became, you got the sense that you were part of the community and you were bringing what's going on in the community to the people that were listening. And that's why, we all did, I think we all did DJ stuff, which was fun, but, at the end of the day, you walked out and, what have I done? With consequence. But the news stuff was really, and plus, news jobs are still around. Not many, but they're still around. Hi, Ben.
I have one of them, yeah.
Now, one of the things that all radio stations locally did, and Ann, you're still a part of this, and we'll talk to you to begin with because it's changed so much, is election coverage. And back in the day, Gail and I remember sitting at the, and David probably remembers this too, having covered it, sitting at Fitchburg City Hall until 2 o'clock in the morning waiting for the results to come in. And now, Ann, the polls close at 8 and you have results.
Pretty quickly. we like those electronic ballot boxes, absolutely. It makes a huge difference.
But a lot of what
still,
you did in your career included
yeah,
election
absolutely.
coverage, right? Yeah.
Way back to high school when I was just interning or working for free for my dad.
Oh, that's why you get into radio.
I would do lots of elections. You just needed bodies. Even now, when we do it here at FATV, you still need bodies to go out because they don't do it at a central location anymore. So I would just be at, most of the time, Leominster City Hall, but that's where I would be, and we'd report the numbers. And sometimes I'd work back at the studios, and we would have this huge whiteboard and just write the numbers down and be adding them up. And it would be, it was always at least till midnight then. And now at FATV, with electronics and the updates to the voting, we can usually tell you by 8:30 what's happening here in the area. So I like that better.
I'd like to talk about being in this business. Some of us were in and out and back in. That would be me. What were some of the other opportunities that came to you as a result of being in broadcasting, being a local reporter? What other things in your lives, and Gail, we'll start with you, because I have a familiarity with your career, but what happened in radio that allowed you to do something bigger in your life?
Well, while I was in radio, I did some TV telethons, cable TV telethons. So I had those kinds of opportunities. I left radio because, as it happens, executive at Digital Equipment Corporation at the time was driving through town and was listening, heard me on the radio doing a newscast, and called the station and said, I didn't know this guy. He called the station and he says, when's your next newscast? And he says, I want to listen from a parking lot someplace. So it turns out that he was creating this audio cassette, if anybody still remembers what audio cassette program, and he needed somebody to narrate. And so he listened to that newscast, and the next day I went to digital and I got the job. So I went right from radio one day to narrating tapes and then doing Digital Equipment Corporation TV. there with, I don't know if people remember Buzz Luttrell. Used to do TV on.
Yeah.
So it was a nice transition, you know. I missed the news, and I thought doing news, and I thought I would, you know. And so I worked for the Worcester Telegram at night, doing stories, you know, as just a stringer. So a lot of opportunity after that.
Yeah, but it really opened up your corporate career, which
It
you
did.
spent the rest of your career
Life,
in,
yep.
correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, Ben, you talked about being a DJ.
Yep.
Along with working in broadcasting, you had a second job, like many people in broadcasting
I had
do.
second and third and
Yes,
fourth and
yes.
fifth jobs. Yeah, you know, I sometimes equate the starting point of my radio career, certainly, with like, you hear a story about an actor, right? Until they became famous, they were waiting tables and they were doing all this other stuff in between auditions and so on and so forth. So in the early days of radio, and I told you, Rick Brackett hired me, I was working at a movie theater, the movie theater at Searstown. So I worked there. I did some jobs over in the mall. I sold shoes. Maybe I sold you a pair of shoes. I don't know. But I sold shoes for a while. At one point where there was a lull in my career, I sold vacuum cleaners, door to door, Electrolux vacuum cleaners, which I still like, by the way. It's not getting paid to say that.
I think they suck. But
So
go ahead.
yeah. Yes, they do. Very well, as a matter of fact. And I managed a restaurant for a year, again, in one of those lulls. And then some of those jobs were, okay, when I was selling shoes, I was selling shoes while I was doing mornings at WGAW in Gardner. So I'd go in and I'd do the morning show, and then I'd drive to the mall for 10 o'clock, open up the shoe store, sell shoes till 5 o'clock, go home, sleep. Of course, I was younger then and more physically fit, so I might go out for a few drinks at night, get a couple of hours sleep, go back to the morning show, go back and sell shoes. And so you did what you had to do until that good gig came along. And one of them was working in Hawaii. I was fortunate to be able to DJ on a cruise ship for 8 months, and then I came back, and I was fortunate enough again to sneak back into radio and get to Boston. And even going to Boston, I came back to Fitchburg, worked at WAM for 5 years with the lovely and talented Ann Bisbee. Still do some actually consulting work for the station. I program some of their stuff, and I work with Ann's husband still periodically when there's a technical problem. He'll get a call or a text from me. Can't get rid of me. I'm like like a bad penny. I always show up.
Yeah, one of the and people who know me find this hard to believe, but I actually taught a semester of broadcast journalism at Mount Wachusett because I was in radio, and Vinny Iolenti, who was still at the Mount, I was very friendly with socially, our wives and myself and other couples, and he opened that door, and I taught a semester up there of broadcast journalism. And as I say, Greg, you're nodding your head, you know me well. It's hard to believe that I actually worked as a teacher, but I did. But your career, Greg, has been up and down. I mean, not up and down, but just all over the place, like most of us.
Yeah.
What opportunities did broadcasting open up for you?
Well, actually, in 1980, I was doing news up at WGAW in Gardner. I'd gone back, and somehow or other, Arthur Clark, who was the mayor of Waltham, was running in the Democratic primary for Congress against Barney Frank and a couple of other people, and I had interviewed him regarding a story during the campaign, and somehow or other they had decided to jettison the press secretary they had at the time, and he asked if I'd be interested, so I said, yeah, I'd love to do it. We came close, but we didn't beat Barney in the primary. But after that, I managed to head out to Seattle and spent 10 years out there doing basically media relations for several nonprofit groups. Worked on a couple of campaigns. In 1992, I consider myself very fortunate to have done press and media in the Northwest for Paul Tsongas' campaign when he was running for president. And so there were a lot of opportunities, but through it all, I really missed being at the station. I know things have changed a lot, but I missed editing tape and racking up the reels to do sound bites. And so when I had a chance to come back here, and as a matter of fact, I came back from Seattle to go to work for Frank at WEIM. So it was sort of like full circle.
Now, Travis, having been at WPKZ and now at North Central Mass Chamber of Commerce. Did that door open because of your your work at PKZ?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't believe I'd be working at the chamber if it were not for my experience at WPKZ. We actually used to do a segment, and we still do. I'm actually, a lot of times I'm now the guest on that segment, which is a little bit kind of strange to be on the other end, where we would interview the chamber about different things that were happening, chamber members and that sort of thing. So I'd actually really developed a strong relationship with some of the staff over there. And I think what really helped me get the job as their public affairs manager is the fact that a lot of the folks that I deal with now, the folks that I'm asking for things for in the budget and asking for support for different priorities, they're people I used to interview on a either weekly or monthly basis. So if I was not doing the morning show, not having to interview all these different state reps and state senators and even the congressional representation for the region, I don't think I would have that job.
Now, Dave Svens, who I've known for my entire professional career, you picked up roots here and moved off to Texas at one point in your career, Dave. Not for a career in radio, though. You went to Texas and decided to try something else. What was that?
Well, that was 1981, and I had, I think, 3 different stints at WFGL. And at this particular point, the new owners had come in to WFGL and what became WXLO. And I was not really thrilled with the regime. And I had just gone through a divorce. And a friend of mine who I grew up with in Fitchburg had been down in Texas, Houston, for some time in the oil business. But he said he was opening up a video game room. This was when Pac-Man was big and the galleries were big. He said, why don't you come on down and run it for me? So he flew me down. He said, if you don't want to do it, I'll fly you back. That'll be it. So I stayed for like 4 years. The game thing disappeared, but I ended up working with a locksmith and had some great times down there. I still stay in contact with those people. But it was, frankly, it was a break from radio because I needed it.
But then you came back to it.
I did. And, you know, I don't know if you're going to get around to, you know, how we think radio has changed. Certainly, and I, as a prime example, part of it is right after the new owners came in at WFGL and the FM station, they had 2 separate staffs, separate sales staffs, separate announcing staffs, obviously. And we were all in that one building, broadcast house at 170 Pritchard Street, and we're literally bumping into each other. That's how busy it was. And my last job, full-time job in radio, was at WCAT up in Athol, Orange, and it was an AM and an FM. They hired me to do news and be the program director. Well, there was nothing to do because they were both satellite operated. And one morning in the winter, and I used to come up from Fitchburg to Athol, you know, 5 o'clock in the morning. One winter morning, I pulled in, and I left about 1 in the afternoon. I was the only person there the whole time. So that's how it changed, you know, with satellite programming and totally different. So I think it's time to get out, so I did.
Well, that's actually one of the things I did want to talk to all of you about. Changes in radio, things that you have seen or that changed while you were there. And I'll start by saying AM dominance and then FM dominance. And when I started, and Dave and probably Gael, AM radio was dominant, the dominant force in broadcasting. FM was coming along like WFMP in Fitchburg. Well, they had an FM signal, but they simulcast the same programming. The WFGL programming was also heard in WFMP because they hadn't figured out what to do with that yet. FM wasn't, you'd go to a Hampton Beach and listen to WRKO because they were playing music back then. It was Dale Dorman, and that went away, as did Dale Dorman. He ended up at KISS, but I think KISS was FM, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what I remember, is just the dominance of AM radio, and then it just went away because FM took over.
Well, right? I can remember because I transferred from Graham up to the Mount to continue my my broadcast education, such as it was. And this is 1975, and at that time, everybody in that class aspired to go to work at WEIM because it was the cool station to work at. They did all the top 40 and popular music during the day, and then at night, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, but whoever did the night show would do some stuff that you might not hear during the day. Not really FM format stuff,
Yeah.
But an album cut here and
cuts,
there.
yeah.
By 1980, everybody wanted to go to work at WAAF. So the change from AM to FM, certainly, it was sudden and obvious at that time.
I remember, Gail, the change from manual to electric typewriters. That killed me.
A lot of those kinds of changes.
Travis, you do something called voice tracking.
I do.
That's a 2022 term. What is voice tracking?
Well, some people, it's a very kind of taboo word. I think it all depends on how you use it. So voice tracking allows people to not have to be in the studio. You can cut breaks at 2 in the morning to air at 7, 8 o'clock at night the next week whenever you want to do it. And I think there are some stations that overuse it, and I think that's one of the big problems with the radio industry right now. As someone who voice tracks, I always feel a little bit guilty. But at the same time, I try and keep it local. I worked down to Virginia and lived down there for a few years, and I've actually now been on the air remotely for 8 years afterwards. And I think the only reason they keep me around is because I keep it local. I try and employ the same mentality that I did here at WPKZ. I mean, I could go down on the air there and just only talk about generic country music stuff, but for that matter, what's the point of keeping me around? So I still contact the different police stations, the sheriff's departments, that sort of thing. I do their news in the morning, and I still keep track of, I get all the community reminders, and we still do very local content. And I think that's why they keep me around, but it's voice tracking. It's great for me because it's allowed me to stay partially in radio, but I also see how it has kind of enabled, I think, a lot of ownership to kind of reduce staff, the staff reductions that you're talking about. I've never worked in a full busy place, except for the place I was in Virginia. They had local personalities, 6 a.m. to 7 at night, but that's really a rarity these days.
Now, how about you, Ben? Something jump out at you?
Well, first of all, they're not keeping you at the country station because of the hats you wear, that's for sure. It's a wrong hat for country music. I want to backtrack just a little bit because I mentioned that I first started working in radio in 1985 at WFGL, and they had just really, FMP had moved to Worcester. They had kind of become XLO down in Worcester not long before that. Satellite programming had just gone in. We had Joe Lacina and some other great people, which Dave Svens knows. I think he hung out with them sometimes, they'd play the music, but it was coming from somewhere else. So radio had kind of already made step number 1 or 2 in changing by the time I got there. Dave also mentioned WCAT. I was working at WINQ in 1988, I think it was, in Winchendon, and Dick Partridge, who owned CAT, I met with him, and he hired me as his program director. And the owner of WINQ called me from the Caribbean and offered me a better offer to stay at INQ. So I kind of felt like that was like the first time in my radio career, maybe close to the last, where people were fighting over me. That's a good feeling, you know, because now a lot of radio stations, you know, it's whoever we can get in the seat, right? Whoever we can get to turn the knobs or do the buttons, or no offense to Travis, but whoever we can get to throw down a voice track. So that element has changed. I will obviously throw up my defensive flag now because I work for an AM station that just happens to be one of the bigger ones in the country and the biggest in New England. It's certainly still well known. There's no loss to us who work in the business that, sure, AM listenership has declined. I think the big thing for AM, well, WBZ, which is where I work, I'll say it again, WBZ, it has a big signal, 38 states, Canada, all of that. So certainly still well known, still gets out there and can be heard. But the one thing that's helped AM radios, especially big ones and the corporations, is a lot of it now is online. You want to listen to WBZ in Australia, you can listen to WBZ in Australia, which you couldn't do in 1978 unless you caught it off some random skip from somewhere and picked it up. But so that, I guess that's helped keep some of the bigger AMs at least in business because it's not all relied on people picking it up off of an antenna. they can get it in a variety of ways, and one of them is listening online. So I guess looking at that, and I've been at BZ now for 12 years, obviously proud to work there, and it's a great legacy heritage station. But I think that helps those stations stay around because you can get them where you could never get them before. So there's a plus and a minus to some of that.
Well, as we look at the market today, Fitchburg, Leominster, Gardner, small markets, newspapers and radio stations, all challenged, and many of them have gone away because in the small markets, you can't compete with the WBZs, for example, because it's more challenging than ever to try to have someone support you through advertising because there are so many other options, including, I would say, the internet. That's a big challenge right there. Be able to listen to WBZ on the internet. Well, if I want to listen to BZ on the internet, and why would I listen to WFGL locally if they can't, if it's automated now because they're a small market radio station? So what I'm looking for is, in my newspaper, is something that actually provides me with news, with information, and not just wire service datelines on it. And you've been in this career for a long time, grew up in it. What changes did you see along the way that stand out to you?
Well, as a child going into WEIM, there were 40 people in the building.
Yeah.
They had their accounting. It was owned by a group, which was very unusual back then. So Night Quality Station to own 6 or 7 radio stations. And accounting was there, and there were 2 news people in the morning and afternoon news people and 7 days a week. And it was just a huge group of people. But there were also lots and lots of local businesses on Main Street and lots of local companies that could support WEIM and CMX and FGL and XLO. And so you could support all of those stations. You had very active stations at the time, but you needed the support. And nobody ever got rich in radio, but you still supported people. You know, you had that kind of a staff, and I think that's a big change when you have the big box stores that came in and took out lots of small businesses. They don't need to advertise locally, and you just lost that revenue stream that kept a lot of people in jobs. I think with technology changes, that has allowed WPKZ to stay in business, so to speak, because the technology allows them to have fewer people doing more, but they can be on, and Travis did an awesome job keeping it local and interviewing people and doing their best to survive in a tough advertising market.
And if I could just kind of speak to the internet portion, I know we're talking about the internet kind of being a competitor, but when you have a smaller newsroom and a smaller staff, I think the internet can also be used as an asset, and especially with like the way that FATV streams the city council meetings and the finance committee meetings, it can allow a one-person morning show person to sit there and watch that and also bounce and flip back to the Leominster City Council meeting and actually keep track of these events where you don't have 3 or 4 people to go to these meetings, but you have one person who can either watch them live or watch them on replay online. So I think it can be an asset for some of the smaller departments if it's used correctly.
Well, I think one of the things that small stations have been able to do, the ones that have survived, and you know from Scott, from when we co-hosted the show together, a lot of what we gave people was stuff they couldn't find at the other big stations.
Right.
We had the local mayors on, we had the local fire chief or the police chief or the whoever was in the news in the area on, and one of the biggest prides of my life in local radio, far and away, is what we were able to do during the ice storm. And get people information they weren't getting from the Boston stations for obvious reasons, and a lot of people didn't have power, and they could listen to us without power. And I think being able to offer people something like that is huge if local radio can keep doing it.
I wanted to touch upon what you're talking about, Ben, and talk about some of those memories because we've got about 10 minutes left, and we'll quickly go around the table and down the list. And I'll start with Dave Svens. Funniest memory. Funniest radio memory, David.
Well, oh boy, there's a few. There was one sort of an embarrassing thing. I was doing the morning show at FGL, and there was, of course, we had the windows that opened onto Pritchard Street, and there was this beautiful sunrise And so I thought I would comment on that. So I said, what a great sunrise out there. I said, those of you that have an east-facing window, why don't you go over there and open the window? And I was torn between saying, and take a look, or take a peek. And it came out, go over and open the window and take a leak.
Nice.
Which I think we did a
as soon as
few
I said
times.
it, the phone started lighting up. So I did. I followed my own advice.
Well, my funniest memory, and it involves Dave, we did a lot of high school football games together, and this happened to be a Leominster-Brockton game in Brockton. And Leominster had a fullback, big kid, his name was Steve Ringer. And he could just bowl over groups of opposing players. Usually took 2 or 3 people to bring him down. And in this game against Brockton, that happened. He broke through his offensive line, hit the defense, and it probably took 3 or 4 guys to bring him down. And Dave was doing the play-by-play, and he was trying to describe to the audience what had just happened. And he said, it's like a car. He's like a car hitting, and he hesitating, hitting a dog, is what he said. And I've never forgotten that. So Ann, how about you?
I don't have nearly any good funny stories like that. The one thing I do remember, it was embarrassing, not for me so much, but I was running the board Sunday mornings, newscast, and we had a news person on Sundays, believe it or not, live, doing the news, and I brought her mic up. She apparently didn't know her mic was up and was burping. And I'm like, do the news. Then we installed a red light so everybody knew when the mics were hot.
Okay, Gail, that leads into your story. Yes, you're next, and I know what it is.
Yeah, this happened to me more than once. I was doing the news, and we had a break for a commercial. And the person who was controlling my mic was rather new. And she just wanted to be, God bless her, she just wanted to make sure she was doing it right. And so she turned my mic on ahead of time, and I had no idea it was on. And so this lady was doing her commercial, lovely lady, and she had an English accent, and she was going on about her store in downtown Fitchburg or Leominster. And I'm listening to it, and she gets to the end, visit us at 25, Lincoln Street. And so I say, and to completely clear air, I said, well, isn't that Ducky? And I heard it come over loud and clear. And she shut my mic off, and she was trying to help me compose myself, but so she turned around like this, but I could see her. And Ed Brogy is looking at me. He's in the other room, and he's going, and I could not compose myself. I couldn't. He keeps putting in public service announcements to try to give me time. Are you ready? No, I couldn't. And you know what? I never went back on after that. And I said, did people wonder where Gail went? And nobody did.
Nobody did.
Nobody did. It was just like, that was the end of the newscast. That's what the last thing you heard. And I didn't come, because I worked with Scott and Dave mostly. And I used to, it was torture sometimes. I used to have to do my newscast like this. Just keep my head down, keep my headsets on, and just pretend they weren't there.
Okay, Ben.
All right. Well, obviously, almost 40 years in radio, there's a ton of stories, probably most I can't tell here.
Right.
But I do want to get one story in and include the legendary Ray C., who everybody certainly is familiar with. And I worked with him, I was working there when he passed. And obviously he had a legendary career in Leominster, Fitchburg area. But one day we were doing a remote broadcast, and it was from over at, I think it was Agway at the time, over near Crocker Field. They were having a big celebration, whatever. And so obviously when you went and did a remote broadcast from somewhere, you wanted to get people to come and, hey, this is exciting, and come down and blah, blah, blah. And we want to sell whatever they're selling. So there's this fertilizer that's made out of lobster. It just happened to be from Maine. It was made from lobster parts. Hey, this is interesting. So Ray and I start talking about this lobster fertilizer. Hey, come down, look at it. They got lobster fertilizer. I've never heard of lobster fertilizer before. And right as we go into break, Ray on the air says, "You got to come down here and see all this crap." Well, that's not really the way to get people down here, but I guess it works. So yeah, Ray was funny, and I'm like, "All right, come see the crap. It's fertilizer, but we'll call it crap for today." So.
Travis.
My most embarrassing one was also on remote, because stuff can happen when you're out, when you're not sitting and you got the four walls around you, and sometimes people do things around you and you laugh. And I don't want you to think I'm an awful person, but when someone falls, I laugh. When someone gets hurt, I laugh. I don't mean to, but it happens. So this was in Virginia. We were working this big festival. It's like the Heart of Virginia Festival, and we're about to come back from a break, and this little kid ate it. Like, I mean, like, ate the pavement, like full on tripped and fell. So I'm like dying laughing as we're about to start. And we had seen a magician a few minutes before that we had like interviewed. So we come back, and my co-host, who was also my boss, said, you know, Travis, what did you think of the magician? And all I could muster up was, I touched his rabbit. And that was it. And he's like, anything else? I pet his rabbit. And that was it. The only thing that could come out, because all I could think of was the kid who had just completely wrecked himself.
Greg.
I guess embarrassing, not because I was on the air, but I had just started working at FGL and FMP part-time. And I did a country show from 6 to midnight on the weekends. And they had automation after that, the Harris automation system. And one of my duties when I got done with the air shift was to put up the reels and for the country music and head out. Well, they didn't give keys to the part-timers. So anyway, I put up the reels and ran downstairs on my way home, shut the door so I couldn't get back in, turned on my radio to see how it was, and I had nobody told me the reels came tails out. So for 6 hours that night, it was 6 hours of country music backwards. And I swear truckers from Maine to Virginia saw either God or the devil that night.
Well, it's lucky because the guy in the song had his wife and his pickup truck come back, and you know, it was great.
Happy ending.
It was a happy ending instead of a sad ending. Yeah.
So just a few minutes left, and I want you to just answer the question as quickly as you can. Would you do it again? Would you do it all over again? Greg?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I loved it. If I had the chance to do it now, I would.
Without a doubt. I'll never leave the Virginia station. They'll have to drag me kicking and screaming. Well, I'm in my basement to stop doing it, but yeah, 100%.
Gail?
I would absolutely do it again, 100%.
Ben's still doing it, so we don't have to ask him.
I'm still doing it, but I'll have a slightly longer answer. But in listening to people here and knowing people in the business, and there are fewer jobs here, and I think only people who really are into this radio's bid them. We do so much even after we leave to get back. Radio gets in your blood. You can't get rid of it. And I think most people in radio would do it again. I would do it again because I'm still doing it. So,
David?
Yeah, Ben hit it right on the head. It gets in your blood, and yeah, I definitely would do it again. Maybe not now, but I mean, if I had to start the career over again, yeah, I would do it again. Absolutely.
And you really didn't have a choice. You had to do it.
I would
but
absolutely do it again.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And I'm happy that I'm able to continue doing a lot of what I loved in radio here at FATV. So I kind of still am doing it too.
Yeah, and I look at my career, I look back on it, and I surprised myself at all the things I did, but it all started in radio. It was because of radio that I went into corporate communications for 20 years, and because of radio, I ended up working here at FATV. And that was through some of my experience in corporate, working, as Gail mentioned, a lot of those corporations had their own satellite business television networks, and that's how they trained people. And that was my experience getting into television. So yeah, I would say for me it was sort of love-hate. I loved doing it. I hated the money, and it was exhausting at times. But
If
great,
I may
great
add
memories.
something here.
Go ahead.
When I was executive director at Fitchburg Access Television, the first thing I did was hire Scott and Ann away from WEIM, and it's the best move I ever made.
Thanks,
Dave,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
hiring me. I appreciate that. Oh, never mind.
Well, I want to thank all of you. It's been my pleasure to work with all of you and to know you for so many years, and all the respect I have for people in this industry, and to call you friends and colleagues means a great deal to me. And for FATV, we want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.